Sam, defend your team, because they haven't won.
Oh my God. Strap yourselves in, it's another 1 hour episode.
Oh yeah.
Spike defused.
What's up, people? Welcome back to Press 4 to Defuse, your weekly source of Valorant news and discussion. It's now Mike's turn to be off on a vision quest. He hopped on a plane somewhere. We might even get to see bits and pieces of his vision quest in the form of casting. But we do have one of the usual suspects in Anders. Welcome back to the show. At this point, I think we're going to have to start paying you. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Doing pretty well. Paul, what about you?
I'm doing just fine. We got a lot of Valorant to talk about, man. Oh, it's been a busy week.
Has.
Well, I suppose we can just jump straight into it. No tangents here today, folks. We're going to be sticking strictly to the schedule. So we're going to be starting it off with the first segment of the show. It is Run It Back, presented by Temple University. And, well, the first little bit of news, Yoru, Rework. We've got some footage here. It looks kind of spicy. We're going to get into the actual details of it. We do have the article as well. But for now, you can just take a look at what these new changes look like. And Anders, as an actual coach, I want to hear from you. What do we think of these reworks?
It's going to be pretty interesting. It's funny. So there's obviously been like a bunch of back and forth in the Twitter sphere of what people's initial reactions are to this. I know that like Ryan's commentary inside the video is like he thinks this is super powerful and will potentially even be an outright meta pick at the professional level. And then on the flip side of that, you have like Def from XSET being like, I don't see anyone over the rank of Silver 2 shooting one of these clones. And exactly. So my response to that was like, in League of Legends, people said the exact same thing about like Shaco clones, Wukong clones, LeBlanc clones, and then pros continue to shoot them to this day. So I'm not sure how much I bite that. It'll be really interesting. It's one of those things where I think that it will honestly have a lot of efficacy, but how potent people get at leveraging the rest of his kit is what's going to drive his play rate. Like this whole clone mechanic is super cool, and I'm sure you're going to get a lot of value out of it on XX, but any sort of piece of utility that relies on your opponent to make a mistake to glean value is always something I'm going to be a little bit hesitant to rely on heavily. I would rather have something that's strictly in my control and I can plan around with 100% certainty than we're going to use this and bank on our opponents messing up and shooting it. That said, he still has all of the things that were making him powerful before this. His flash is still great, has an absolutely incredibly long flash duration. His ultimate got strictly buffed, and his teleport is better than it was before, and it was already debatably the best part of his kit. I think people just need to learn how to use it better. So will he see play? TBD. Does this definitely push him in the right direction? Significantly so.
Paul?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about like actual good analysis, that pretty much covers it. I have a lot of funny things that I want to see, right? Like I cannot wait.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Because Yoru's gonna get played. People are at least try him, right?
Yeah.
I think he's good enough to where you can at least try him and try to make comps around him, and try to make strategies around him too. I think there was a lot of room for funny plays where the new fake out, right? The clone gets tossed out alongside an execute, and you see 4 people there, and you just shoot the first body, and then you get flashed and you immediately die. Or you see 4 people there, and you don't shoot the Yoru because you think it's a fake. Turns out it's a real Yoru. And you die because you assumed the wrong thing, right? I also think his ult gets is way, way, way better now. The fact that like there's no limit on the vision, that's ridiculous to me. No limit on the vision is an absurd scouting tool. I cannot fathom a reason why a well-coordinated team would lose a round in which they have Yoru ults for taking or retaking a site unless somebody just pops off and does something insane, right? Like you just get to know where everyone on the site is. It costs you absolutely nothing, and you can hit them with whatever utility you want. That ultimate seems really good to me now.
The fact he can use all of his abilities while ulted, that includes his flash.
His flash
is kind of gnarly. Like that's the thing that honestly breaks it for me, is like this man can run around a site invisible with full vision and flash people. Hold up. How is this
and there's no
balanced?
Activation anymore or no detection anymore.
Yeah.
So I think if you just like run around, okay, there's still footsteps, which is but if you get to a site, you like start shift walking, flash someone, come out of ult, smash them in the face with a shorty, like it's gonna be fun. I think that the clone could be cool against ops, like a great kind of counter to that, but it's going to be interesting to see how the pros actually deal with that. So there's the stuff about the ultimate. No longer revealed to enemies, can cast all of his utility, can hear the footsteps, but no longer nearsighted. Unequipped delay time is increased slightly, so that's why you need to flash before you pop the shorty in the face, because you need to be able to pull the gun out. And then cast delay added when casting dimensional drift, preventing the invulnerability frame on cast. So yeah, Yoru's looking a lot better now than he did. I think he's always had a really fun kit, but it's never had a huge place in the meta, because you always have to think about what you're going to give up in order to bring that in. And there are so many other agents that do similar things, but better. So hopefully now with these slight tweaks, he might get a bit more playtime.
And he's still really gimmicky, right? There's only so much you're going to be able to do with him reliably. So I think there is still a concern like, hey, if you rely on like 2 or 3 gimmicks with Yoru, what happens in 6 rounds into the game when those gimmicks have been read by a good team, right? So this is definitely like, I think it makes Yoru debatably playable, but to what extent? There's only one way to find out. You just have to see how good teams are at using them.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's something that'll be really interesting to what Sam was saying. What this is all going to come down to is opportunity cost, and whether or not the redundancy that he creates in a composition is in places where people care about it. Because right now, like, he's not as hard of a fragger in an entry as Arena would be.
Sure.
So the opportunity cost you're giving up is less punching power, but you're getting increased utility in the fact that he has soft info tools and the ability to have those cheeky gimmicks. Now, are those info tools strictly redundant and not necessary because everyone's also running Sova, or do we put enough value on them to where we think that is something worth taking on to maps consistently? And that's going to drive his play rate. Like, that is strictly, like, you could even encapsulate it down to those 2 agents in that simple comparison. I think that's what's going to do it. Is his info so redundant that Sova covers it, or is it worth giving up a little bit of punching power for those extra tools? Yes, no, that will drive his play rate.
All right, let's move on to our next topic. We're going to start heading into roster changes. And there have been a couple over the past little while. First and foremost, we know that MW0 was playing with Keyed Stars at Champs. Well, now it is 100% official and confirmed he is sticking around. He's staying on the team. And for those of you that were around for Champs, there was a little bit of drama that kind of centered around MW0. So hopefully that portion of it won't be carrying through into the 2022 season. Paul, what do you think about this?
I mean, it makes a degree of sense, right? I'm not the most familiar with the Brazilian scene, but I can't imagine too many players that would be an upgrade to put in that spot. That being said, Keystars didn't have the best showing at champs with I think, they went 0-2 or whatever it is. But I always like it when teams, especially within a region, right, are willing to just say, hey, we have a roster that works. There are just a couple of tweaks we need to make. And then, maybe this time come Masters, right, they can actually be a team that really shows up for Brazil, because we know there's talent in that region. It's just been a rough couple international events for them.
If we look at the way that sort of successful Brazilian teams have architected themselves historically, Keed bringing on MW long term just like fits that mold perfectly. They're a region that relies super heavily on like these star-studded rosters. Every single player represents massive X factor, and it's like each person on this team could potentially just go 1v5. Good luck. Try and beat us. And making sure that MW is a piece in that puzzle makes complete sense. I mean, he was dominating the entire Brazilian scene for what felt like an entire year. Then he hops on Keedstar. They go to Champions, show a lot of promise. I mean, obviously there was that Cypher camera fun stuff. And like, I mean,
good times.
We don't need to go back to it too much.
Yeah. So, I mean, the pieces feel like they're in place, and if circumstances were slightly different at Champions, I feel like the narrative around this team could be completely different.
For sure.
So we'll see how things go.
The thing that I'm interested about, because he, like you guys said, was really impactful and whatever, and of course we saw the fact that they did actually beat Ascend, and the Ascend players themselves came out on social media and said, this isn't how we wanted to win. And if that cam hadn't been used, if we don't replay that, if we don't start at, oh God, what was the scoreline? Like 10-2 or something equally
And they
stupid.
still almost won it!
And they still almost won it. And all the Ascend players are like, if we don't start with a head start, they beat us every single time. So they are an incredibly good team.
Sure.
Yes, there were a few mistakes that were made that kind of need to be polished up on, like how well we know the rule book. But apart from that, if we could just kind of fine tune that, I think this could be, a really, really huge contender. We saw the smaller regions do really well in champs. I want to see a repeat of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, moving on to the next one. Drone is a free elf. We've known for a while that he's been benched, but he's finally been released from his contract. And we do know the importance of that in terms of things like buyouts. Unfortunately, however, VCT roster lock, way gone and done and dusted. So next season, question mark?
Yeah, I mean, there'll be more than enough teams between now and the end of April that are changing players out in NA, right? And I don't think there's... Anders, correct me if you can think of someone bigger. I cannot think of a bigger free agent right now than Drone in terms of just pedigree.
He is definitely very high on the list.
Right?
My sort of take on him is, what the hell is he playing nowadays?
I had that written down, right? Because you're not going to have him on Phoenix.
I always thought he was like a really, really great Sova player, and then he pivoted onto Duelist, and I don't know if that was out of like team dynamics or if that was personally driven. Because I feel like if you put Drone on Sova and you let him develop that skill set more fully, there aren't a lot of great Sovas in North America. Just saying. So, like...
or IGLs.
Yeah, like, that's actually a fair point as well. Like, he has a lot of experience, obviously, like a depth of background that really... It feels like there's a lot of it in NA with all the CS players that we had transfer over, but I feel like the number of them who can leverage that well into leadership positions is very slim.
Sure.
To see if he can sort of pivot back into more of an initiator role and one that is sort of helping develop one of these otherwise young teams, he could find almost endless success. I feel like he just needs to make sure that he finds a role that suits him and allows him to succeed in the free agent marketplace, because if he comes in and he's like, oh yes, I'm going to try to compete with other Flash Initiator, Flash Duelist players, I don't think he's going to find his footing. I honestly just don't think that he's going to be competitive enough side by side with a bunch of these crazy Zoomers that are coming up through Tier 2, Tier 3.
At least
I do see
soon,
MCE
right?
in the chat, so shout out, another friend of the show, talking about how his Raze and Sova are still really good, and he's capable of playing anything flex, so could still be like in a flex role.
And I think that's one of the great things for Drone moving into his free agency, right? Is that he can kind of leverage, like, depending on who looks at him in the next couple of months, he can kind of leverage it into whatever position he wants. If he wants to play Sova, if he wants to IGL, roll it back, play Sentinels. I do think you have a point about like the Crag Zoomer thing, right? I don't know how he's going to stand up against some of the 17-year-old entries that are just coming on the market these days. But even then, like, Drones had a degree of success with that, right? If you're a team that's in the sort of like tier 2-ish scene, you're not going to get much better in terms of who's available right now unless you do the scouting yourself and actually find one of those diamonds in the rough. So Drone can kind of do whatever he wants.
Yep. All right,
Yeah, I agree
moving on
completely.
to the next topic. Sorry, we got to get through this because there's a lot of stuff to cover.
You have quite a bit.
We are going to be talking about Game Changers Emea. So here's a little bit of news on this front. Oxygen have not re-signed their women's roster. Now, there was a similar thing, at least this was announced in some fashion, but Smara CIS also did not renew their contract with their players. I later found out that the issue was that discussions or negotiations broke down and they weren't able to reach an agreement that they were all happy with. And so the Smara CIS players, the ladies, left the org, and now they're busy playing under No Org, who did exceptionally well. Now we're seeing a similar thing here with Oxygen, and it's very likely that it was a similar scenario where negotiations broke down. I don't know if that could be a huge thing, because I feel like Oxygen is the kind of team that could support really well, especially a team that does this well in the scene. But overall, I felt like it's a bit of a weird move. I don't know how heavily or closely you guys have been following the scene, but to me, this seemed a bit odd.
The only thing that immediately like hits my brain, right, is the inconsistent like spending of money, quote unquote. I don't know what really happens behind the scene. I don't have like a payroll sheet in front of me. But like they drop their main roster in EMEA and then pick up a women's roster, which is really cool. And then they get an academy roster in NA. And then drop their women's roster shortly afterward. Like, I'm just wondering what like the business strategy here is for Oxygen Esports, and like, is it a thing of like they only have enough to support one team at a time, and like they looked at their two teams and they were like,
academy, you know?
Well, I mean, academy is a weird word to put on it. I think they just put it on it because they can't compete in VCT, but you have like really big names on that team, right? Like you got Redux and a couple other like popular players. So I wonder if this is just like this academy team in NA is going to bring more interaction in the coming months, and we only have the budget for one team.
Yeah. I mean, being someone who comes from more of like a business background, this screams business decision to me. This is a situation where whoever in their organization is in charge of like new opportunity analysis is either like a really snap decision maker and thus ends up in an awkward position a lot of the time where they go into one thing, have to sort of cancel out and go to a new venture fairly quickly. Or they like recently went into the role and decided to make the pivot, because an NA tier 2 team with a lot of promise is just going to have more eyes on it than a team that's sort of like struggling to make top 8 in EMEA Game Changers. So organizationally, from like a raw business, get eyes on our brand perspective, it makes complete sense. I don't know whether or not that's the reality though. So who knows? Without like talking to their upper management, your guess is as good as mine.
Exactly.
At least
pure speculation.
Yeah, at least from a team perspective. I mean, I feel like the women's team that they had over there was excellent. Like one of the things that I think is under discussed but super cool about the EMEA Game Changers scene is the wealth of powerful oppers that they have relative to the NA circuit. And like we have Ness's tweet up. If you look at Ness from a statistical perspective, one of the craziest oppers in like the global Game Changers scene. So to have them be free agents now is very interesting.
There's that new rule, right, where it's like a Game Changers player can subvert the necessary amount of local players that you have to have, right? So maybe if you're looking to build an NA team or something of that nature, and you need an opper,
a cracked Turkish opper,
there's one available.
All right, let's move on ahead. So something that isn't pure speculation, we've actually seen this coming for quite some time, but Stanley has been benched from 10-star. That makes me very sad because I'm a huge Stanley fan. I think he's actually a phenomenal Astra. But when you consider who he's been replaced with, and as you were talking about this, it makes sense.
Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, anyone who's followed the European scene for a long time will be sad to see Stanley go. I'm sure he'll land on his feet because he's an excellent player who's been consistently performing in that ecosystem. But when your direct competition is Doma, like realistically, how much of a chance do you have? The guy's coming off a world quarterfinal. Like, how do you compete with that? It's always going to be rough. So sad to see him go. But again, I'm sure he'll end up exactly where he wants to be in the long run.
Yep. That about sums it up, Paul.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I'm going to have more to say about an EMEA player more than you
Fair
two.
enough.
Come on.
Especially from the guy who
the guy who coached one of them, sure.
You know, I think you're wrong about Doma, Anders, and let me tell you why.
You know what? If you had a spicy take, I would love to hear it.
I mean, I'd take that on the nose. Sure, hit me.
The day I do, you two will be the first to know.
Fair enough. All right, let's move on. Dark Zero has dropped like almost their entire roster. We spoke about Neil Zeno being picked up to Dark Zero literally 2 weeks ago. They play through the last few tournaments and Neil Zeno just like, bye everyone. They've kept Screwface, the Jet player. Of course, he's cracked. He's really good. But they've tossed Jammies, which to me is like a huge question mark over and above. I mean, they're all really good. So this to me was the serious what face moment. Paul, what do you make of it?
I mean, it again, I don't know any of the interaction behind the scene here, but when you have this many good players on a roster, to me, it screams that there was some kind of communication issue or something of that nature, right? Like just the team was like each individual piece of this team succeeds on another roster. We've seen them all succeed on other rosters. They just didn't work together for whatever reason, whether it was just stylistic differences or maybe personality, at that point it becomes speculation. But all four of the players dropped here should be landing on their feet sooner rather than later. But it also makes sense. Like it's hard for me to blame Dark Zero because they've really been underperforming, right? They have not been doing well, at all through their last few tournaments. I thought I had their results in my notes, but apparently I forgot to put it down. But either way, right? Like they got bodied out of, I think it was like the round of 64 in the last VCT. Like they didn't even make the double elim stage. So it's as much as I wish this was surprising, it makes sense when you just look off like results based. But I'm also wondering who they're going to pick up instead. I guess Drone's available now. But otherwise, like, where are you going to be upgrading from these four?
Yeah.
That's really the question. It's like Dark Zero as a team sort of probably peaked in that one top 8 VCT run they had last year. And it's been sort of like a very, very slow decline since then.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, they didn't like fall off a cliffside or anything, but they've never really reached those heights again. And where they now have Neil coming in, someone who has tons of experience coaching at the top level, if he doesn't see long-term potential in the roster, especially where they've now failed to qualify to this sort of cycle of VCT main, just slash and burn the roster. This is the time to do it because now you're not paying those players' salaries. You've got a couple months to figure out what your rebuild's going to look like, and then you put it together in time to ramp up to the next VCT. Like if this roster's already hit its peak, it started tail sliding, you bring in a new coach who understands to compete at a high level, he doesn't see long-term return on investment, better to cut your losses now and start looking to the future, which is unfortunate because, again, all of these players are excellent. They've proven that they're top caliber players, but if they don't gel in the way that's necessary and the way that the coach has their vision laid out, then that's just the way the cookie crumbles.
I'm just really glad that like there was a community gaming event last year sometime and I got to interview a bunch of the teams and I got to interview Dark Zero and it was literally the best interview I had. I laughed so hard I was crying and I still have that saved in my Google Drive. So we'll always have that, boys, but good luck and hopefully you find a new team. Speaking of new teams, not necessarily a new team, but Mouse Sports has joined Valorant. A new challenger enters the arena and I must admit, to my eyes, this roster is freaking good. They were competing in VRL DACH. VRL DACH. So this is just like, it's been in the works. Now it's been announced. Woo, big surprise. Alorante, so Heretics is no longer Alorante and Friends. Lazar, previously that was on Rix GG. Cryptix from Liquid, obviously. Amilwa, also on Heretics for a while. And Memset, super cracked out Viper player, also previously from Rix GG. You can hear how biased I am towards this team. So I'm going to throw it over to you guys, and you can tell me what you think, Anders.
I mean, it is a pretty stacked roster. It's all players who have shown immense potential but never been able to convert on it fully with the teams that they've been on. And it's often situations like this where you have like incredibly high caliber rosters just immediately come into being. Like you take players where it's like, this was a star player from X team. This was also a star player from X team. And now we've decided to put them all on the same team. And they aren't stars in the sense that like you look at them and you think it's some sort of unthinkable like god roster where the org is just throwing $1 million. Team. Yeah, it's not a super team. You're not throwing $1 million at the roster that's just been put together here. But you look at all the pieces and you're like, I expect all of these players to succeed wherever they go. And now there's a new mesh that, if it gels properly, could just be insane.
And they've been doing well in their VRL, right? Like they've won all their matches thus far decently decisively, I think, off the top of my head. So like proof's in the pudding to a degree. We'll see how much pudding there is.
Oh my god. All right, and on that note, boy, do we love a scummy org. Thankfully, Mouse is not one of those, but let's jump straight in. So the first little bit of drama that we have is Noble GG. Now, this tweet has since been deleted. Not Jake's tweet, obviously. Hello, Noble fans. This is the social media team. We will not be working until we all receive the payment that was promised in our contracts. This was then followed up by a twitlonger by the owner of Noble. And it is the weirdest thing. Now, Anders, I'm so glad you're here because you are the finance guy. Please tell me that I'm not crazy when I say this is the dumbest shit I have ever read.
This is one of those things where, like, this just reinforces 100 times over to me that there isn't competent leadership in esports at many, many levels. Because I know straight up 18 and 19-year-old business students who haven't finished their undergrad who could run a business more successfully than this. I do not understand how this shit happens. Like,
and they have people like that too. Like I know a few of the people who work at or worked, I should say, at Noble. And like they're smarter than that. Why is this guy the one in charge of them? Tens of thousands of fees to PayPal
fees.
Have you heard of a direct transfer with a bank account? And like I wish this was surprising to me too. But like I'm gonna say something. This might be controversial. You guys know those people, like you'll like meet that guy at a party that's like a friend of a friend. And like your friends are all like, yeah, he's great. He's awesome. He does this cool stuff. And you just get the vibe. And it turns out like 2 months later, he's just awful. Right?
Yeah.
That's how I felt about Noble for like 2 years. And I could never put my finger on it. Because like it was mostly fine the whole way through. And like, this is just such a mess. Like it's just such a mess.
The worst part is that it's tens of thousands of dollars over the course of a year.
A year! That's more than half those people are making!
How?
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Dude, working off of several Excel worksheets, like, what?
It's
there were individuals who were lost. What is your admin team doing?
Man, imagine if they spent $10,000 to hire an accounting firm instead.
Instead of paying PayPal fees, just you can put me on retainer. I'll fix this shit up real fast. I have a finance degree. Hit a brother up, like.
Bro, I don't have a finance degree. I feel like I do a better job.
I can fix it.
Yeah, honestly.
Holy
Jesus, it's just a mess.
So yeah, Noble. And the thing is though, like this isn't the first time that Noble has been in the eye. I feel like there was some drama back in the Overwatch days as well. And if I remember right, they like changed ownership, and this was like the new.
This was supposed to
ownership.
I mean, to be fair, it took them 2 years longer than it did the old ownership to like for it to go south. Upgrades, people.
Improvements.
Upgrades.
Baby steps.
Jeez.
All right. Speaking of scummy orcs,
Oh, no.
it doesn't end,
Combo
folks.
breaker.
This one is this one's really
Oh, this
special,
one's bad.
interesting to me. Okay, so this is the twit longer where he blames. We'll get into it in a sec because I think we've got this in the wrong order. But he blames all the shit on mental issues, depression, and so on, and and it's the usual copy pasta. Oh, I'm gonna, it was a learning experience. I'm gonna take time to work on myself and realize that I did the wrong thing. Blah blah blah. Fish paste. But the reason that this is so mind-blowingly fucked is that what he is blaming on depression are things like sexual harassment and racism, right? What? If we could actually pull up the Jake Sucky tweet. No, it's not Jake Sucky.
No.
Did I not post it?
It was
damn.
her tweet. I'm pretty sure you did. Yeah, the Joanne one.
It's the Joanne one. Sorry,
it's
they're
that
right next
first
to each
link.
other.
They're right next to each other.
So we'll get that up in a sec, but it's where she talks about, so this is a female team. This was Motive Esports, and if I remember correctly, the Twitter account, the owner's Twitter account, all of it has been deactivated and yeeted. But they were a women's team competing in VCT, EMEA, GC, and a lot of them were, because it's EMEA, some of them were Turkish or Czech or, from various different countries, and they were given a lot of hassle for that. And then on top of that, they were treated badly because they were women. And like the org, one of the points she makes was the org didn't even know when we were competing. They were in the middle of a VCT match, and the org people start pinging them to go play ranked. And they're like, do you not know we're literally competing for the org right now? I mean, there was so much shit going on. And I just, how does this shit happen?
Scumbags.
Seriously,
they are
orgs.
very much still populating everywhere. Well, and I just feel bad for, like, obviously for the players, but very specifically, but also like any aspiring player who's like a woman or in marginalized gender. Like, you got to be so careful, because scumbag teams will just pick up women's rosters for the good PR and then pull this shit, apparently.
It's
sorry, guys, that I
sucks.
harassed you. I was depressed. What?
I don't know, man. Look, I can't speak for every person I've ever interacted with, but I feel like my mental health issues have never impacted me in such a way.
No.
It's really frustrating to me that you end up with so many of these situations, and I think it's because oftentimes so many people are sort of like chasing the esports dream so voraciously that like they'll just grab onto anything that presents itself as like the next step in that journey. And like you really need to be selective when looking at orgs that you're going to sign to, people that you're going to work under, because historically, like, there are people who have succeeded in esports for years where their only job qualification is charisma, and that should not be the case. So like you've got to be careful, because shit like this will happen unless you keep your finger on the pulse of your own situation and sort of your long-term goals at all times.
All right. I don't think we're going to be able to bring up that tweet, but I think I managed to get the gist of it out. So we're going to move on away from the scummy orgs and into some potentially sad news for FPX. Angel has tested positive for COVID. Now, there is a chance that he's going to be unable to compete in their very first match of the season, which I believe is against Big. Now, Angel did come out and say, look, guys, it's not confirmed. I'm busy trying to kick this thing's ass. Hopefully I'll be able to play. But if he's unable to play, what do we think the repercussions of that could be, Anders?
Depends on who's playing instead of him.
That
honestly, like that is the cop out, but 100% true answer is, if he can't play, who plays for him? Because depending on who that is, they're either going to face plant or do perfectly fine. I mean,
and I mean, the good news, the silver lining, I should say here for FPX is you've got a lot more matches, right? And you only have one match a week. Losing this first match sucks, especially when it's like a team that I feel like it would have been pretty close. But you've got 4 more matches to play. there's still a decent chance at least that you can run through it. It's not like the end of their VCT run, but it definitely sucks to not have Angel for the very first one.
Yeah.
I do wonder who they'll bring in. That is a good question.
There are a lot. I mean, I guess there aren't a lot of options. That's the.
I mean, well, the main question I have is like, do they have to bring in a free agent, or can they like get a player on loan from somebody?
Not affect that?
I was gonna say historically, it's you can't bring in another signed player, and so if that extends to VRLs, like they have to go way deep in the tank to find someone to fill this, and it's gonna not be a spectacular
which is why
player.
I'm wondering if there will be like a health exception, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if Riot's done those, but I know in esports there have been health exceptions to things like that before, right?
Why not just reschedule the game?
Like,
surely that could happen.
Too.
Like,
don't try to logic with VCT. Can we just...
yeah.
All right. Let's head on because we again are like behind time.
We had a lot of news this week, and we haven't even
so
started on the
news.
VCT stuff yet.
I know. All right, let's keep going. TSM, after 2 years, are finally joining the real world. Dude, I don't know why it's taken so long.
They successfully made it to 2010.
See,
I don't know how it's taken this long, honestly. So they've given their GM full agency to decide on who they believe is talented, motivated, coachable, etc., etc. And after this process is complete, they'll be moving the main team to Austin together, which were they not to begin with. Then they're going to start participating in all open events, which I believe we've been ranting about on this show for like 2 years. All of these teams that don't compete in the smaller events. And then they're going to update the community, sure. But like, seriously, it's taken this long?
Yeah. I mean, you know, I think if you are the most generous TSM fan, this is a move that they should have done when they missed like the LCQ, right? Definitely way before, in my opinion. But at least this is a step in the right direction, right? I'm wondering what's going to happen to the roster because like there's a lot of good players on there, but this tweet also screams to me that people were like butting heads, right? You've got resetting the culture, team that is motivated, coachable, right? Like these are buzzwords that you use for specific reasons.
The previous team wasn't ?
I mean,
exactly, right?
Was there ever a question that the previous team wasn't coachable? Like, I'm pretty sure I have said that in no fewer words on multiple podcasts. Like,
I mean, but it's funny too because like especially like from watching the results of the first round of VCT, they said like, oh, we're competing in all the open events. It's like, yeah, no wonder. All the open teams kicked most of your asses. Like them, Genji, Tier 1 or T1, FaZe Clan. Like none of these guys were playing in opens and they all got slacked by teams like the Guard and NRG, right? Teams that have actually been grinding the opens and playing competitions.
It's almost
Crazy
like
how that
practice
works.
helps you improve.
yeah, it's
Wild.
almost as if going outside of your normal scrim pool of 6 teams will give you more diverse experience and expand your protocols. Woo! Absolutely
Who'da
wild.
thunk
If
it?
only there was a way TSM could have known that before they lost VCT.
I know, it's not
but
like
nobody could have seen it coming.
It's not like their org's
one could
been
have foreseen
operating
this.
in esports for like a decade and should have that ingrained in their corporate culture at the highest of levels or anything. It's fine.
We don't need to
worry
get
about
into
it.
TSM culture. We're gonna be here all day.
Oh god. Roll it
Dude,
back. Nope.
I swear, we could just rename this podcast to Press For to Dunk on TSM.
I mean,
I wish that was the button for it. I would
right, chat,
rebind
press forward
any
and
key
dunk
on
on
my
TSM.
keyboard to do that on automatic.
All right. So our last little bit of news here. Cheaters everywhere. This does kind of tie into something that we spoke about previously in I think it was T1, yeah, help sewers. Now we've got 2 other teams that have been given a competitive ruling. The first, of course, is G2. Their coach Pipson was heard on mic saying something, and it turned out it was like a "let's fucking go"
nice,
type
I
vibe,
think,
you know?
yeah.
It was just like a woo, good shit, guys. The interesting part is that when he spoke about it in his own tweet, he was like, "I unmuted to get excited," or like you consciously made the decision to unmute. I mean, it wasn't like an accidental, you scream, you're like, yeah, the team needs to hear this.
I mean, you can think to yourself, yeah, the team needs to hear being hyped the fuck up, right? I mean, you can do that. It obviously isn't the right decision from a following the rules, but also, it is a slap on the wrist for G2.
Yeah,
and I think
I mean,
all it merited was a
warning,
slap on the wrist, right?
Yeah.
The
thing is, though, so the argument against the slap on the wrist is that's just what was heard through his mic. How much might he have been saying? Because you don't have chat logs of the voice channel.
True.
So for T1, they could go through the actual text chat logs in the game and be like, oh, look, you said this, you said that, blah, blah, blah. And that's exactly what they did with Movie Star Riders, who is the other team that just got sanctioned for doing similar stuff. They went through the chat logs and they said, oh, but look, this could have given a competitive advantage. So now we're going to give you a really huge sanction. For G2, it's impossible to know if that really is all he said. And this kind of comes back to what you guys were talking about last week. Mm-hmm. Is it possible to even enforce this rule?
So if you're going to have the rule, first off, I think it's almost completely unenforceable. Like, that's on its face, It's almost completely unenforceable. However, if it's already written and codified, it needs to be a zero tolerance policy, and it doesn't matter if it's a single nice. You should levy the same punishment on that person as you do on David Denny. This isn't like a gray area type of rule. This is, you broke a rule that was codified. We are going to slap you upside the head. Like, otherwise, you're just never going to get any sort of adherence. Like, the rule is almost strictly unenforceable. The only way you're ever going to get some level of enforceability is by ensuring that if people slip up at all, they're dead on arrival. Because that way they're going to fear that rule.
I feel like at least the Movistar thing kind of moves toward that at least a bit. I'm not super familiar with the VR. There's so many VRLs. I don't know the format of all of them off the top of my head. But I'm led to believe that a 3-point deduction is at least like, it's, ouch kind of thing, right?
The thing is, though, I think, as far as I understand, they did that because by this point, Movie Star Riders had already been knocked out.
Oh.
So they just deducted 3 points from one of their matches, which resulted in a loss.
Oh.
But yeah, because this was kind of like a hindsight thing. Yeah, I mean, it was questionable.
Jeez. All right. Well, and that's another thing, right? Both of these were like so delayed compared to when the actual match happened. Right?
Yes. But it's because of T1. They were like, shit, now we gotta go
like,
sort this one out.
We gotta enforce our rules now.
God damn it, creating more work for us.
But I think,
we shall keep people updated as these things unfold, because we have 15 minutes to get through VCT, EMEA, NA, Game Changers, and Winter Champs.
Rapid fire. Go.
Let's jump into it. We'll start up with Game Changers, EMEA. I'm not sure if either of you actually watched, but it went somewhat to be expected. G2 Gazen come out on top. They're the back-to-back winners. Them and 10 Star are the only two teams to have won it twice, and they're the only two teams to have won it. 10 Star, speaking of, only managed to snag themselves the third place spot, losing to Guild X twice. Guild X looking absolutely phenomenal at the moment. Did manage to completely decimate G2 on one of the maps in the grand final, but for the rest of it, it was fairly one-sided.
Sure.
Overall, this has been a pretty good event, but here's my question. What are the thoughts overall of the women's scene in EMEA? Because for the longest time, we kept saying all of these teams are super competitive. Any one of these teams could win at any given moment. It's crazy rock, paper, scissors. But now, the last few GCs have been the same 3 teams doing really well, and then like a smattering of other teams in between. So are we now getting into an NA scenario where it's just C9W and then everyone else? What are we making of all these other teams?
That's kind of how I think the scene is going to shape up pretty much across the globe. Is that for the early lifespan, it's going to be pretty competitive as we figure out who in the scene is good, right, relative to the other players, and then the big orgs will come in with money and buy the good players, right? Like G2 comes in and buys the players. They put, and it's not just buying the players, it's also putting like the coaching resources in and the management resources in, and letting these players have the optimal experience. Like orgs like G2, C9, 10-star guilds, right? Like those are the environments that can cultivate the talent that is already there, right? So I think it's going to be hard to not have somewhat lopsided scenes as long as it's still somewhat new, right? And then, hopefully before too long, we'll get to a point where it's extremely competitive up and down the ladder because, we aren't in a position where we feel that, how am I trying to put this? Basically, women don't feel so fucking scared to play the goddamn game and get harassed all the time.
So,
but orgs are still harassing their players.
Succinct.
So
here's my take. It is absolutely going to be like this for a while because you're going to have like a very significant, like the term that is probably the closest analog to it is almost like a brain drain, where you have like all these peripheral areas and like all of the talent goes towards cities. I think in the female circuit, both in EMEA and at a global level, you're going to have a very high concentration of talent early on, because right now we're still at sort of the maturation of that scene where the majority of the top level talent are all of the female players who came from CS and other shooters who had already broken through those cultural barriers, have dealt with the bullshit, made their way through it, and they're the only ones at the top of the pyramid right now. However, I think as time goes on, you're going to get the next generation of people who have had those barriers torn down for them. You're going to have the 15-year-olds, the 16-year-olds right now in a year or two who have a clear path already carved for them to go forward, and then the scene's going to open wide up.
Yeah. I can agree with that.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump on over to Nsg Winter Champs. Now, we had day one play out already. We did get a look at that, so we're going to get that up on our screens in just a second. There we go. Oh, look how pretty it's done. We don't have to scroll. All right, guys, so here it is. Surprises, upsets, teams that disappointed. Anders, go.
Oh, man. Teams that disappointed everyone. No.
To be fair, evil geniuses making it this far in the first place? Hell yeah. Okay, they didn't get much further, but they made it here.
EG also qualified for VCT NA though, right? So for them to get knocked out, I mean, losing to XSET, no shame in that. Getting knocked out by Reformed was kind of a curveball, but Reformed also came out of
No, it was Moon Raccoons.
It was Moon Raccoons, and then Reform knocked out Moon Raccoons. Yeah. That's double bad. You knocked out the ones that got knocked out by the ones that shouldn't have been winning. And obviously the transitive property of esports, we joke about it all the time. Just because Team A beats Team C and Team C beats Team D doesn't, etc. But I definitely feel like, we'll talk about this more later when we talk about VCT, but EG still, despite qualifying for VCT, things like this make me still very hesitant on this roster. Not the roster, on how they're playing right now.
So if that holds true, does that also apply to teams like the Guard dropping maps to zero marksman? Does that...
But then they 2-0 clapped them later. I think that's still...
The revenge run.
I think that it actually does apply. It kind of does apply. I just think the Guard are on a different tier, right? When I watch the Guard play, they're still really great, but there's still very clear learning, growing pains, right? Yeah. There are rounds where I just think, all right, they aren't talking to each other at all. They don't know what they're doing. They didn't have a plan for this round. And I think that's kind of what happened in the ZMM game, although it happened off stream, so I don't actually know, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's what happened. Or actually, what map was it played on? It was played on Split. Never mind. Guard are okay at Split. So my other point was going to be maybe it was just a map that Guard didn't want to play, but nope, that's not the case.
I mean, if anything, I can meme and be like, oh, everyone was a disappointment. But in reality, I'm not going to flame these teams for losing maps. Because the fact that they're losing maps is exactly why these teams should have been playing these events all along. Because the only way you're going to get to the level where you aren't dropping these maps to random tier 2, tier 3 teams is if you're playing these consistently and shore up the gaps that they're exposing. So I am happy to be disappointed by these results because it means that we're moving in a direction where they're not going to happen in the long term, which is the way we should have been in the first place.
Well, this was day one with the 4 groups that we had. We're going to be heading into day 2 later today, in fact.
No? Playoffs are today. Day 2 was yesterday.
Oh, sorry, that's right. Playoffs are
today. Yeah.
So, same question as what I had previously. Surprises, upsets, teams that disappointed.
Okay, now my reformed point holds.
Yes.
Now I'm surprised. I'm surprised by how well they did. And like to a degree, I'm not. I think it's a team of like hardcore grinders, right? Like you've got Jerk on. I've really enjoyed watching Jerk play for a really long time. You put Renz and Chemicals on that team too, right? Like that's 3 players who I absolutely have loved watching as individual players and haven't quite landed on the right team. This is looking great, right? Reformed have been looking pretty good. I hope they can hold this form and it's not just like a one-off in a tournament because there are a lot of teams where that happens. My other note is like poor Radiance, dude. They ran the gauntlet. They ran the absolute gauntlet. They played 2.
Yeah, seriously.
They played, what was it, 7 maps, 2 of which were 19-17 overtime. Poor guys.
I was doing some playbook last night at 12:45 my time, so well into the wee hours, and I looked at VLR and they were still playing. So if that's any indication, it was a slog and a half yesterday.
They played 3 overtime maps out of the 7 maps they played. That's oof. Oof.
Oof indeed.
Other than that, I think day 2 was a little bit more reasonable, right? You know, you had most of the teams going through that you expected. Accru, V1, NRG, Knights, Guard, Exet. Those are the teams that I think if you were looking at this lineup, you expected those teams to make it.
Renegades drop into Reformed was like the only upset.
That's the biggest upset, right? And it was still a pretty close match. It was 2-1, and most of the maps were relatively close. It was only Breeze that was more one-sided. The other 2 were like 13-10s, which isn't that bad to be losing. So now, I mean, playoffs today is going to be wild.
It's going to be a good time for sure. Because you've got like, how many of the teams are in VCT main that are about to play in this playoffs?
Oh, no.
It's like half.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of the 8.
Literally more than half of the pool is a preview of VCT main matchups. So cool stuff.
Really
so there you have it, folks. If you want a preview of what's to come in VCT, definitely check that out today on this channel. We'll be having the playoffs of the Nsg Winter Champs. Let's hop along over the pond. We're going to talk a little bit about VCT EMEA. Now, for both VCTs, we're only going to talk about week 1 matchups because time constraints are a thing. But here we go. These are our first few matchups for EMEA. And first and foremost, the groups were wild. I think it was Group B. That's just an absolute group of death.
Yeah.
And then Group A, like you've got some really good teams, and then you've got like some, decent teams. But Group B is terrifying. So looking at these matchups, what are we expecting to see over the course of the next week, Anders?
I'm legit going to be that guy who just speedruns. I'm going to tell you all my predictions right now. We've got Gambit over TL in probably the closest matchup of this entire set. We've got Fnatic over G2 because I have a lot of belief that Brave is going to come in and be an absolute superstar for that roster. I think Big over FPX because even if Angel does play for them, he's not going to be on his A game. Ascend is going to absolutely bulldoze Supermassive. I think that Lithuanian United KEKW is going to beat Na'Vi quite handily, and I think that I think that Guild is going to beat BBL. There's my preds.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much with you across the board there. I have TL over Gambit, but like you said, it's like
the closest one
the
for
closest
sure.
match.
Yeah,
absolutely. None of the rest of these matches are going to be particularly close. I think the big FBX one would have been really close. If Angel wasn't having health issues, unfortunately. The G2F Fnatic one, I will say, is going to be very close on social media. That's gonna be fire Twitter game to watch. G2 usually takes the lead in those kinds of engagements, but I think Fnatic's gonna wipe the floor with them in game.
Yeah, I think.
Just speaking of banter, so I was watching Valoranting, and they were talking about the G2 Gozen trash talk towards Guild and towards.
You mean
10
the literal trash?
Dude, okay, that was Guild. Yeah, that was them literally taking out the trash. But then there was like, I think it was Mimi, maybe one of the players had pasta and they'd written like "fuck 10-star" in the pasta sauce on the plate. And I just thought, and that's all they were talking about. I'm like, did you guys miss the part where 10-star rented a billboard in the middle of London that said "fuck G2"?
I did miss that part. That's amazing. Oh my
they started this, yeah. But I do really enjoy that there is quite a bit of fun back and forth banter, just to kind of slip that in there. And with regards to your predictions, I think that I would agree with them 100%. The first week, probably not the spiciest of matchups, but that will be this weekend, so check that out.
Well, I mean, we get pretty much the only close Group A matches, right, this week? Or what would have been close Group A matches. The TL Gambit one's going to be close, and the FPX Big one would have been close. I think any other team against any other team in Group A is going to be an absolute just slaughter.
Very clear cut. Like, it'll be an upset if any of the matches in that group from here on out go other than like the
whoever
blatant
wins TL
obvious
Gambit
answer.
should be going undefeated.
Yeah, exactly.
Period.
Yeah,
End of
definitely.
story. No exceptions.
Also, it turns out the 10-star thing was Photoshop, and I'm really sad, and my hopes and dreams
get
have
baited.
been so
Smashed.
crushed. Dude, I'm so
Absolutely
sad.
destroyed.
I'm
I was
so
gonna say,
sad.
I would be surprised if some billboard company was like, "Yeah, you can say fuck on our billboard. That's fine."
I mean, that screams like G2. It's
That's
fuck
true.
I mean, they did
Sentinels all
rent a
over
plane,
again.
to be fair.
Yeah.
That is true.
And the
That is
truck
true.
in the music video, yeah.
But
All
they're
right,
privately owned, though,
VCT
and I
NA.
digress.
We should probably wrap this up. So here we go. We got our groups for the next few matches, and I believe that those at the bottom are the matches for this weekend. There might be some more of them,
Pretty sure.
but there you go. So hit me with your predictions.
Am I going first, Sanders, or are you?
Send it. I took the
All right.
limelight of the last one, so
I'm taking C9 over 100 Thieves because 100 Thieves have not. They've made a lot of changes in the offseason. I think it's going to take them a while to gel. Guard over LG. Guard looked good. Xset over EG. I think EG kind of had an easy run into V. I think EG is going to get clapped in that group. I'm going to be honest. I think they maybe play LG close and they're going to get clapped by everybody else. I'm taking version 1 over Knights because version 1 just have looked so unbelievably good to me. Sentinels NRG I think is an interesting one just because I
NRG,
think
let's go.
NRG have a lot of steam, but on paper I don't think they take Sentinels, but Sentinels have been looking increasingly like slowly deteriorate. They're still one of the best teams in NA. I'm going to give it to Sentinels, but if NRG did end up winning that, I wouldn't be the most surprised if that makes sense. And then Envy over Rise. Rise are a good team, but they've looked really shaky in the last couple of weeks. And Envy are Envy.
And the guard Luminosity X at Evil Geniuses?
Oh, I thought I did that one. Guard
Did you?
over LG. I think Guard are great. C9 over 100 Thieves. C9, obviously. And then
Yep.
Xset over EG. I think that's the most clear-cut match of the entire week. EG look far better than EG used to now that they have an almost entirely new roster. But I don't think that they hold up to most of this group.
yeah. I think I'm on the same page in literally all of these. I think that NRG beating Sentinels is a distinct likelihood. I don't know how much Sentinels have woken up during this little lull.
That's the question.
And it's the eternal question. Like, NRG have been one of the teams who have started like really grinding these other events. Are they going to come in really hot and Sentinels are slow to start?
How many White Claws are we dealing with this weekend?
Yeah.
That's the question. Always with Sentinels. How many are we?
You know
in?
what? You do that one time and you just never live it down.
Never. It's too funny.
Do you know what? I don't know how much I believe this, but I'm throwing my oh my god, why is my alarm going off? What the hell? Sorry. I'm gonna
It's
throw
telling you that we're
my
running over.
pretty much. I'm throwing my weight behind NRG. I kind of want them to succeed just because of
agree.
how freaking hard they've been grinding, and I think that they deserve it. Assuming they show up on the day. If they don't show up on the day, they didn't deserve it. But hopefully we see that.
You
And
want
then-
them to deserve it.
Yeah.
There you go. And then Envy Rise, another one where I'm kind of putting my money on Rise on this one.
Really?
You know, Envy have phenomenal players, and they look good for the most part, but there was a distinct drop off, after Masters because of
Sure.
reasons. And again, Rise grinding out the lower tier tournaments, and they also are looking good. So yeah, kind of on the hopium there.
I feel like Envy's architected themselves in such a way that they live and die by whether or not EA can find value. They're one of the
That's
few
fair.
teams that I think is still running that if our opera doesn't find success, we lose, like, macro strategic approach to the game. And I don't think it's sustainable. Like, and that
That's
really,
fair.
I honestly think that's why they floundered at Champions. It was like, wait, you're telling me that EA can't drop 30 every map? Guess we'll lose. Like, and if they come in to this sort of kickoff of the season trying to function under a similar premise, I think they're just gonna get slapped around. I think they're gonna have a horrible time of it. So
That is fair. I will say in terms of the overall event, totally agreed. I think Sam, I don't know how much you've been looking at the Rise matches. Rise was the team I watched the most. I went back and did like I slowed down every single one of their videos or their VODs from this week.
Were you 0.25ing?
Yeah, I'm pretty much actually. And there's just a lot of there are a lot of things that Rise are doing wrong now that they didn't do wrong when they had such amazing performances late last year. And I don't know where those are coming from because I'm not in, I don't know the inner workings of the team.
Yeah.
And it looked better this week compared to the first LCQ where they looked completely lost. I'm just wondering how quickly they're going to get back on that curve and back to performing like they did at the LCQ, right? I think Derek is still doing really great. Neptune has a really sick raise. Shanks looked fire this weekend, especially when they played BBG. I think he really woke up on that last day of the VCT qualifiers. But how many inconsistent performances do we have left for Rise? Is the question that I have going into the group stage.
Well, I'm going to be huffing that hopium for the next few
Fair.
days at the very least. And next week we can come back and relook at what we thought was going to happen. Unfortunately, Anders,
I won't be here, so I don't have
No,
to
wait.
eat my predictions being wrong.
You know what? You might.
You might
be
Mike's still gone.
Yeah, Mike is still. He will still be on his vision quest, so there is a chance that Anders will be here next week. But either way, guys, that's the end of the show. If you enjoyed it, please follow the channel. Remember that we do host the Winter Champs, and I believe that the VCT games that aren't casted, like during quals and stuff, also get broadcast on this channel as well. So it's just a really good channel to follow in general. Also, if you've enjoyed us, names down below. You can find us on Twitter and all that good stuff. Anders, I know we asked you this 2 weeks ago. Anything coming up?
Yeah. I mean, I've got my team announcement coming out in the very near future. PogChamp.
I do know of at least one other thing that it like ties into that. If you're still doing that,
Yes, I am.
the
But
tournament?
that will be
Okay.
super secret. Super
Okay,
secret.
fair enough. Yeah, so we'll find out soon about that. Paul, what about you? The one that doesn't know anything about what's going on.
Casting a bunch of collegiate Valorant. Collegiate is, new semester starting up. This season's like I know collegiate gets just kind of pressed down the ladder a bit because there's so much good Valorant happening into the pro level, but collegiate's actually really heating up this semester too. It's looking to be insane. That's today too. Today and tomorrow. Tomorrow. There's no Winter Champs tomorrow. There's no VCT tomorrow. So come check out some collegiate.
Absolutely
It'll
do
be on
that.
my
Paul is a
Twitter.
fantastic caster. And for myself, I'm back with VRL Northern Europe this from Monday. So come check that out. We are jumping into the playoffs. Really exciting. Winners go to another tournament. And the winner there gets to go to VCT. It's somewhat convoluted, but either way, it's going to be a ton of fun. Hope you all enjoyed the show. And remember that we are live every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern and whatever that is in your own time zone. I don't do conversions. Have fun with that. Have a great evening, everybody. Enjoy playoffs and VCT, and we'll see you next week.